Good afternoon. I wonder if you could take your seats, please. We should start virtually immediately. So if you take your seats for this afternoon session of the third committee. Okay, I call the meeting of the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions to order. The agenda for the meeting has been distributed. Could I please invite you to adopt the agenda? Are there any objections to the agenda? If not, the agenda is agreed. Does anyone wish to speak against the draft agenda? No? So we're now going to proceed. It's a pleasure for me again to be in the chair for this committee, and I welcome you to the meeting. Could I, before we begin, say that if anyone has a prepared text, it'd be helpful if you could hand that to the Secretariat, because it enables the interpreters to make the meeting more productive and efficient. May I also remind you that the election of committee officers for the 30th annual session of the Assembly will take place during the committee's final session, which is likely to take place on Tuesday morning. Nominations for candidates for election should be handed into the table office not later than the start of that meeting, 11:30 or on Tuesday morning. Now, earlier today, we completed our work on the committee's main resolution. We now move forward to the first of our supplementary items. That is on combating violence against women journalists and politicians. There are no amendments to this item. Sadly, Heidi Fry is not able to be with us, so I give the floor to Ms. Boniface from Canada, who will introduce this on Ms. Fry's behalf. Ms. Boniface, you have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, on behalf of Dr. Heidi Fry, head of the Canadian delegation, thank you for the opportunity to present the proposed supplementary item on combating violence against women journalists and politicians. Violence against women in journalism and politics is widespread and intensifying. This phenomena poses a grave threat to all women in the OSCE region and beyond, as well as to society and to democracy more broadly. Dr. Fry's 2021 annual report, published in her role as OSCE PA's Special Representative on Gender Issues, is entitled Violence Against Women Journalists and Politicians, a Growing Crisis. A year after the report's release, the issue remains of paramount importance. This crisis is still growing, despite many efforts that have been taken in the OSCE region, such as the publication of Dr. Fry's 2021 report and its recommendations, the work of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media, Teresa Ribeiro, and the various commitments that have been made through OSCE Ministerial Council decisions on preventing and combating violence against women and on the safety of journalists. This supplementary item highlights that gender-based violence against journalists and politicians puts the well-being of our societies and our democracies at risk and threatens to undermine progress towards gender equality. In addition, it emphasizes that women politicians experience gender-based violence, misogyny, and discrimination throughout their time in office, beginning from the moment they announce their candidacy. An Interparliamentary Union survey of women politicians revealed that more than 80% had experienced psychological violence during their time in office. The supplementary item also underlines that women journalists are affected by an increasingly hostile political rhetoric directed towards journalists and media organizations, and that they face disproportionate risk of severe types of harassment and sexualized online abuse. According to a recent report from UNESCO, nearly 3/4 of women journalists report experiencing online violence, which in many cases also extends offline into physical violence. To better understand and respond to violence against women journalists and politicians, we must collect and publish disaggregated data on the prevalence of violence against women journalists and politicians in the OSCE region. The supplementary item also demands, amongst other measures, that the OSCE and its participating states first develop or review legislation and adopt gender-sensitive policy approaches to address violence against journalists and politicians, including violence occurring online. Secondly, to create platforms for the exchange of best practices and discussions on how to address violence against women journalists and politicians. And finally, provide training to OSCE election observers to detect and report acts of violence against women in politics. Ultimately, attacks on women journalists and politicians are attacks on democracy, and they cannot be tolerated. I ask for your support for this proposed supplementary item. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We're now open for debate. The time limit for speeches in this debate is 3 minutes. There is still a chance for you to put your name down on the list if you'd like to take part in the debate. And the floor is now open. And the first person whose name I've got is from Spain. It's Mr. Gomez Anton. I hope I've got the pronunciation right. My apologies if I haven't. Anyway, Mr. Gomez Remus Anton from Spain. The floor is yours.
Just informed, actually, he's not up here, so go to the next one, please.
And then to be followed by, from Azerbaijan, Ms. Oh dear, I'm struggling with these names. Aminazadeh. Okay?
We can go straight to her from Azerbaijan.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So Spain, please.
Spain is not here.
Mr. President, we have cancelled the intervention of Mr. Anton. I think there's a mistake on the list. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Right. Well, Azerbaijan, followed by Greece.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We proceed from understanding that media can and should play a more active role in fostering peace and security, particularly by promoting and encouraging mutual understanding, tolerance, and non-discrimination in the OSCE region. This is even more urgent in the light of the increase in the incident of radicalization, ethnic and religious intolerance, and xenophobia, including Islamophobia across the OSCE region, as well as deliberate attempts in some participating states to abuse media and its tools by spreading disinformation, fake news, and hate speech for their own narrow political interests. OSCE Ministerial Council decision on the safety of journalists adopted in Milan in 2018 stipulates that participating states should condemn publicly and unequivocally attacks on women journalists in relation to their work, such as sexual harassment, abuse, intimidation, threat, and violence, including through digital technologies. The participating states and their authorities are called to enable safe working conditions and ensure the safety of journalists by inter alia bringing to justice those responsible for threats or crimes against journalists. Azerbaijan attaches high value to the issue of providing enabling environment for women, including women journalists, to unfold their full potential as an integral part of our society. Azerbaijan has been one of the first few countries sorry, and for including women, Azerbaijan attaches high value to the issue of providing enabling environment for women, including women journalists, to unfold their full potential as an integral part of our society, and also have been first countries with a predominantly Muslim population to ratify the International Convention on Women's Rights and Gender Equality and adopted laws dealing with the eradication of gender inequality and violence of any sort against women. Over the last 3 decades, Azerbaijan has made considerable progress in empowering women. At present, gender equality and equal balanced participation of women in social and public life remain among the priorities of our government's policies. Azerbaijan has a solid track record of providing enabling environment for women, particularly in media, to unfold their full potential as integral part of our society, and also gender Equality is among the priorities of the government's policies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. The next speaker is from Greece, followed by Sheila Jackson-Lee from the United States. So Greece, please. Ms. Gara.
Ladies and gentlemen, violence against women has escalated, especially during the years of the pandemic COVID-19, with an estimated 1 in 3 women in the European Union. 1 in 2 women has been sexually harassed. 1 in 20 women reports being raped. Women are very often the targets of toxic behavior and bullying on the internet and social platforms. Also, the biggest victims of the war in Ukraine are women and children. Women journalists and politicians are no exception. 1 in 2 young women have experienced this kind of behavior just because of their gender. Women are targeted and stigmatized by hate speech, sexism, and even sexual violence and physical assault. In recent times, there were even murders of women, many of them politicians and journalists. This alarming phenomena must be tackled effectively and efficiently. Women journalists are not only targeted because of their work, but also because of their gender. Cases of discrimination, harassment, and attacks are recorded within and outside of the workplace and also on social media. Same goes for women politicians. Vicious comments about their appearance, threats, as well as verbal, psychological, or physical violence have increased. This behavior aims to demean their personality and dignity and question their suitability to serve as politicians or journalists, just because they are women. Immediate action is needed to stop the impunity for such crimes. Legislative action is also necessary to take effect through institutions of the state and the legislature. Specific measures should be taken to address discrimination and assault, to start collecting more efficiently data on incidents of gender-based violence, both online and offline. It has been observed that there is a lack of statistics and data analysis related to violence against women journalists and politicians in OC region and generally. Dear colleagues, we know that without pluralism, there is no democracy. Pluralism, especially in my country, is under threat. It is threatened by silencing, political gaslighting, and propaganda practices. It is threatened by the conservative government, which treats press freedom the same way it treats women's rights in a hostile, restrictive, and repressive manner. It is no surprise that Greece dropped to a 108th position in the press freedom rankings, and it will not be a surprise if it records the same low score in women's rights. 20 women lost their life in 1 year in Greece because of their gender. We should not forget that women journalists and politicians face a double burden. They are attacked as professionals and as women. The often toxic criticism comes not only cause of disagreement, but also because they have the ability, the courage, the authority to express their opinion as women. Closing, we must take measures to protect rights, lives, pluralism. We must protect women. We should not be complacent, but instead we should be constantly active in advancing our actions and vision. Thank you for your
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Sheila Jackson-Lee from the United States, to be followed by Yasmin Pozio from Sweden. United States, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take a moment of personal privilege and to wish the United States a happy birthday and happy Independence Day for this day of freedom in the United States. This issue, this epidemic of violence against women is a massive global epidemic. And frankly, it is tied to the questions of democracy and freedom. The more authoritarianism rises in our world, the more oppression comes for women journalists and women politicians. And so it is crucial for this body that embraces democracy in its majority, a focus on how democracy can be the cleanser and should be the cleanser of gender bias. It should be that women are able to do their chores, if you will, their chores of political work, their chores of journalism, free and untethered by words and deeds that would jeopardize their very life and their very work that is so crucial to bring about a diverse perspective. When women journalists are engaged in the covering of war, they address the question of how women are treated, how children are treated. They address the question of the caring of women and children, or the bias that these fleeing refugees or displaced persons may confront. Women have a tendency as journalists to tell the stories of some of the crises in developing nations, particularly the inequities of women as they try to raise a family in such impoverished conditions. Women reporters are interested in that. I'm reminded of my trips to Afghanistan, particularly in the first stage of the war after the election of the first president, and women parliamentarians actually went to serve in government. When the Taliban began to rise again, women politicians were actually killed on their way back to their constituencies. Obviously, schools that catered to girls were burned. These are broad circumstances where it shows the bias and violence against women. So I argue that this is a very important resolution because it is important for democracies to stand up and to stand up against authoritarian governments that may allow a broader spread of gender bias and violence against women and women journalists. We also know that we should take care of our own backyards and make sure that we assure our constituents that we stand up against gender bias wherever it is. Thank you so very much. I yield back.
I propose to close the list now. We've had quite a few names added in the last little while. I propose to close the list for speakers as of now. So the next speaker is Ms. Yasmin Pozio of Sweden, followed by Ms. Farama Karimi of the Netherlands. Ms. Pozio, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I hope that Ms. Hedy Fry's colleagues could please send my appreciation for this important and brilliant resolution. For us women to become empowered and to have equal representation in all aspects of the society, we need equal representation in journalists and politicians so that there will be a day when we as women don't have to work twice as hard to reach the positions that we have reached today. The way patriarchal and often nationalistic and conservative men harass and violate women is also seen when it comes to women journalists and politicians, and therefore I endorse this supplementary item, and I hope all of you in here do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I propose to call next Ms. Farah Karimi, followed by Ms. Amanda Grek from Malta. So, Ms. Karimi, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to speak in strong support of this very important resolution. And, Mr. Chair, I don't know whether you noticed, mainly the women, female colleagues have spoken in support of this resolution. And I am missing actually the voice of men, because we need also our male colleagues to speak out and speak up against violence against women. That's unacceptable, and we have witnessed a rise of violence against women journalists and women politicians. Unfortunately, not only in authoritarian countries, but also in democratic and liberal countries, we see violence, we see harassment, online harassment on social media, and this is something unacceptable, and we all have to stand up against that. I would like also to take the opportunity to recognize the very, very important work of our colleague, Special Representative on Gender Issues, Dr. Fry. That's unfortunate that she is not here, so please send our greetings to her. So her tireless work has been very, very important for recognition of importance of gender issues in our organization. And I would like also to recognize the very important work of OSCE representative on freedom of media. Again, another very, very strong woman. So thank you very much. This is a very important resolution, and we will support that.
The next speaker is from Malta, Ms. Amanda Grech, followed by the last speaker, Mr. Pons from Spain. Malta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quoting the head of UN Women, violence silences women, renders them invisible, pushes them from public space. Only when women are safe from violence and there is accountability, only then we can progress. Testimonies from women who are active in politics point to 4 reasons as to why violence is still an issue. Some women feel that violence is a normal part of politics and may not perceive it as an issue. Others are aware that violence is not acceptable in politics, but do not speak out in order to protect their political careers or their political parties. Another group did not fight the violence so as not to be accused of bringing abuse upon themselves. The final group does speak out, but feels that there is no one to tell or that there is no way to adequately describe their experience. This is the reality women are facing daily. Violence against women in politics is a form of gender-based violence that does not only relate to physical violence, it includes any act or threat of physical, sexual, or psychological violence that prevents women from exercising and realizing their political rights and a range of human rights. It manifests itself in various ways, including physical violence, sexual violence, and psychological violence, as aforementioned. A new phenomenon is online violence, harassment, and hate speech. Hate speech is one of the easiest ways that women are discredited in the public sphere, and this particular type of verbal violence is very difficult on young women who may simply choose to shun public roles such as political activism and journalism rather than be subjected to hate and violence. Violence against women in politics is still an underexplored concept, and the data related to it may not be realistic. Many women do not report this type of violence for fear of stigma, damaging their reputation, or not being believed. There are also issues of loyalty to their political party, where they might feel disloyal if they speak out. Female politicians are not the only ones facing these forms of violence. Journalists too, and being a journalist for 21 years, and now a politician, I can experience from my previous work I did as a journalist and now as a politician. We need to work hard. We need women voices to be heard and represented loud and clear. And all of us in this room and all the community, international community, are responsible to ensure that all women are empowered to take on jobs in politics and journalism without any hindrance to their safety and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And the last speaker is Mr. Pons of Spain.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. If you don't mind, I'm going to speak in Spanish. En primer lugar, agradecer a la señora Fry que haya hecho esta resolución y, por tanto, además, aprovecho para desearle una recuperación, una pronta recuperación. Algunos puntos muy brevemente. Primero, cuando hablamos de violencia contra mujeres, periodistas o políticas, pero en realidad la violencia es una forma de expresar una dominación del modelo social. Por tanto, aquí estamos hablando primero de una forma de dominación social y, por tanto, me parece muy pertinente este punto, esta resolución. Segundo, como ha dicho alguna de las diputadas que me ha precedido, sobre todo es porque esa violencia se ejerce en primer lugar porque son mujeres, no por nada más. Después va lo siguiente, pero primero porque son mujeres. Luego, también porque es una forma de erosionar las democracias, es una forma de debilitar. El señor Guy Verhofstadt, que es un hombre liberal, que no es precisamente de mi familia política, dijo en el Parlamento Europeo que la guerra en Ucrania lo que pone en juego es el futuro de las democracias liberales. La violencia contra las mujeres, periodistas y políticas también pone en juego esa democracia liberal. Y al mismo tiempo violentar y atacar a esas mujeres periodistas y políticas lo que hace también es reforzar las democracias iliberales que tan de moda están entre algunos. Me gustaría también hacer hincapié en la violencia sobre las mujeres en las redes. Es una violencia que está increciendo y que, por cierto, me gustaría decir que cada vez afecta a mujeres y a niñas más jóvenes y, por tanto, es uno de los grandes problemas. Hay estudios online que dicen claramente que hay un incremento muy grande. Me gustaría terminar en dos temas. En un tema en el que me voy a salir. Me gustaría terminar simplemente diciendo que el derecho a disponer de tu cuerpo como mujer y a decidir libremente y a negarlo también, señorías de esta plenaria, es una forma de violencia extrema. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Now, the resolution, in fact, has 28 paragraphs, and we need to agree them all. Does anybody object to taking 1 to 28 together as one? Okay, thank you for that. Those in favor of doing that? Yes, thank you very much. All right, abstentions? 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you for that. Now we need to formally move to a vote on the draft resolution. Now, would those in favor of adopting the draft resolution as amended, please raise their voting cards. That's the whole of Heidi Fry's resolution.
It hasn't been amended.
No, it hasn't been amended, no, as it is, as it stands. Okay? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much indeed. So the draft resolution is adopted. And can I say that a lot of people have paid tributes to Heidi Fry and the work she's done and wishes for her speedy recovery. And I'll make sure that's passed on behalf of all of us. I have to say, over the years, Heidi Fry has been such a force for energy on gender issues and other issues that there's quite a gap here when she isn't present. So I hope she'll be with us again in future, and I hope she has a speedy recovery, and we'll pass that message on. Right. Now we move on to the second of our supplementary items. The importance of the human dimension in the context of current threats to security in the OSCE area. I think you have the wording. There are 4 amendments to the item. I give the floor to Mr. Bierecki from Poland to sponsor this draft resolution. Mr. Bierecki, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me thank the co-sponsors of this supplementary item, 43 delegates from 19 countries, who see the importance of the human dimensions in this context of the war on Ukraine. Mr. Chairman, as we speak, Russia continues its aggression on Ukraine. And it is clear to all of us that we must use every tool to continue the pressure on Russia. The human dimension of the EECE shall be emphasized in our response to the war, as we, as all OSCE countries, committed to the comprehensive catalogue of the human rights and democracy norms Russia is breaking now. So I ask you to accept this supplementary item as proposed.
Right, thank you, Mr. Bierecki. Now, I've got a list of names. If anybody wants to speak and add their name, there's still time for you to do it. I'll close the list shortly, but not just yet. The floor is now open for debate. And the first speaker is from Portugal, Mr. João Montenegro. From Portugal, please.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear members. Last year, the United Nations General Assembly debated how COVID-19 has intensified the factors that grow up human trafficking. People of all ages, backgrounds, and nationalities can be victims of this crime. Typically, those who are already marginalized or in vulnerable circumstances are more likely to be targeted, such as undocumented migrants or people desperate for work. The latest United Nations report about drugs and crimes show that around 50,000 victims of human trafficking were detected and reported. This number is expected to be much higher. Dear members, the United Nations Migration Agency is also concerned about the risk of human trafficking as well as sexual exploitation and abuse in the Ukraine region due to huge influx of citizens escaping from the war. Millions of people have already left Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, these are not just numbers. These are people, these are citizens. The deterioration of the humanitarian situation and the subsequent movements are correlated with an increase in threats to individual security, putting people on the move at an increased risk of exploitation. Reports from inside and outside Ukraine indicate a potential for traffickers to exploit the vulnerabilities of those who escape from war. António Vitorino, the United Nations Migration Agency General Director, say that the organization reports show that people escaping from Ukraine are predominantly from single-parent families, including women, children, and the elderly. The Portuguese António Vitorino say that these groups can be especially vulnerable to the risk of trafficking as they leave their homes unexpectedly and can have their usual family networks and financial security seriously disrupted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Ms. Inka Hopsu from Finland, to be followed by Sheila Jackson-Lee from the United States. From Finland, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, the brutal attack of Russia against Ukraine shocked the whole Europe. It is imperative to stand together, show our full support to Ukraine, and condemn the Russian aggression against another sovereign state. At the time of war, it is of great importance to remember that civilians should never be part of the conflict. All acts that risk the lives and well-being of civilians are unambiguously wrong, and Russia must be held accountable for violations of the international humanitarian law. The work to investigate and prosecute war crimes needs to be supported. Now it's important to focus on sending humanitarian aid to Ukraine and its neighboring countries, and to ensure humanitarian and civil society organizations are able to continue their work. By now, over half of Ukrainian children have had to leave their homes. Altogether, 4 to 5 million children have been displaced. I want to remind all of us to pay particular attention to supporting the vulnerable groups like people with disabilities, children and youth fleeing without guardian, as well as minority groups like Roma. Mr. Chair, disregard of human rights in general and women's rights in particular, restriction of the space for political opposition, as well as limiting the freedom of expression and media, have always been an indication of something even worse to come. Early warning signs, if you wish. They have often been followed by terror and use of force. I truly hope we have learned a lesson. They must be addressed early on, across the world. The OSCE plays a key role in ensuring the human rights are upheld in all countries. The youth of the 90s, that I myself am part of, were able to live in a world that was coming together. The Berlin Wall came down, the Baltic countries got their independence. I am saddened to see my children grow up in a world where new walls are built, new blocks established. Can we reverse this trend? Instead of escalating and spread of wars, we need finding a solution to so-called frozen conflicts. Instead of destruction, we need reconstruction. In order to stop climate change and the loss of biodiversity, we need a world working together, a world addressing these shared challenges together. The conflict in Ukraine calls for this kind of unity as well. We must jointly condemn the Russian invasion and make Putin's regime bear the consequences. Our main goal is to bring peace to Europe. We can be achieving this by supporting Ukraine in the war and showing Russia that it attempts to undermine international law, democracy and human rights will not succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now next speaker will be Sheila Jackson-Lee, followed by Mr. Kemal Ayudin from Turkey. United States, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, since this is a continuation, to thank Heidi Fry from Canada for the great work that she has done. This resolution from the thoughtful gentleman from Poland builds on our commitment to human rights. And I want to thank him for this very thoughtful but very pivotal and potent offering today. This is a world crisis. This is not a crisis that can be suffered by Ukraine alone. It is not a crisis that Russia can tend to isolate. This brutal action that has generated this mass, if you will, this mass evacuation of people from their beloved land. That's what we have to think of when we think of this resolution, because we've seen the reports and footage on our nightly news for the horrific scenes, the destruction that is carried out by Russia. How do you bomb a hospital full of pregnant women? How do you bomb a theater where children are hunkered down trying to survive? How do you bomb a shopping mall and an apartment building, as is going on over and over again? And so it is important for Ukrainian and international authorities, as well as NGOs and individuals, that they collect evidence of war crimes that are going on, human rights violations. The first OSCE Moscow Mechanism expert fact-finding mission already in April found patterns of Russian violence that may amount to war crimes, crimes against humanity or genocide. Also at home, Russia has stepped up its repressive policies against independent journalists, civil society, and human rights. My own constituent, Brittany Griner, a world-renowned Olympian WNBA player, was picked up and held. She is held with bogus charges, and she is in prison, along with Paul Whelan. They're taking Ukrainians. Russia is also undermining the human dimension of OSCE, the cornerstone of OSCE's concept of comprehensive security. Without human rights, there can be no security. Russia is holding hostage OSCE's budget, closing its field presences in Ukraine, blocking mandated annual human rights meetings. We must condemn Russia's attack on human rights and the rule of law. People are suffering and people are dying. And if we do not stop it in its tracks, as someone would say, they are at me tonight, they will be at you and your door tomorrow. OSCE's Human Dimension events this year should focus on Russia's violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. OSCE's institutions must continue to work autonomously and to work without having their budgets held hostage by Russian aggression. And I urge that we stand up united together and support, of course, this resolution. We must show Russia we're unafraid and we're proud of democracy and proud of Ukraine. We must do that every single day.
Thank you. I now propose to close the list of speakers. The next speaker is Mr. Kemal Aydin from Turkey, followed by from Belgium, Mr. Mark Damesmaker. My apologies for my pronunciation. Turkey, please.
Thank you, Lord Speaker. Dear colleagues, humanitarian situation in Ukraine is worsening day by day. On the one hand, millions of civilians have been displaced. On the other, loss of human lives is increasing. In addition, serious human rights violations are ongoing, including those against Crimean Tatars. Dear friends, targeting of the civilians and civilian infrastructure is unacceptable, of course. In this regard, thorough investigation on human rights violations must be ensured. Those responsible for the human rights violations must be held accountable. In this respect, Turkey has joined the 45 countries that initiated the Moscow mechanism for 2 times. And finally, I would like to emphasize that we are very grateful to Mr. Bierik for tabling this supplementary item. We support the text, and I would like to thank you for such an illuminating report. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. The next speaker is Mr. Mark Demesmaeker from Belgium, followed by Mr. Pavlo Frolov from the Ukraine. Belgium, please.
Yes, thank you, colleagues. I won't repeat what I said yesterday during our debate on the resolution on human security for all as a basis for European security, because also there was a great focus on Ukraine. I just want to compliment on what I said yesterday. When I was in Bucha and Irpin early April, one of the things that struck me most was to see the determination of the people to resist and to win, but also the resilience of the people, keeping strong. You know, they started cleaning the rubble and clearing the streets days after the Russians were driven out of the towns. But you know, when you talk with the people, when you speak with them, when you listen to them, and when you look into their eyes, you see that they are in shock. You see the pain, because most of them lost loved ones. And what I heard over and over again is, we can and we will rebuild what Russians destroyed, but what we cannot bring back are the loved ones that we buried. Civilians, women, many of them raped, men, many of them tortured, children, hundreds of them have been killed since the beginning of the war, many more have been injured. Many of the people who are left behind now will carry this trauma with them for the rest of their lives. The thoughts of their loved ones and what they had to endure during the last days and hours of their lives. Now they need humanity, human warmth, and they wonder, is the rest of the world with us? Well, there is no gray zone between light and dark here, between good and evil. Killing civilians, the tortures, the systematic rapes, this is pure evil, and it must be stopped. I hope we are united, and I see all the flags there in front of us, 56 flags. Well, one of them is not represented here, but what I hope is that we speak with one voice that says, we resist this evil. A united voice which is so important for the victims in Ukraine, but make no mistake, important for the rest of the world and of this beautiful planet.
Thank you very much indeed. And the last speaker on this debate is Mr. Pavlo Frolov from the Ukraine. You have the floor.
Thank you, Lord Chair. Every day, the world learns about new victims of the war in Ukraine. Very young children often become them. This is what happened to an 11-year-old girl from town of Privilya, Lugansk region. At the beginning of May, she was seriously injured as a result of Russian artillery shelling of her town. Later, the girl was evacuated to the city of Dnipro, where the best Ukrainian doctors fight for her life. However, after 2 weeks in intensive care, her heart stopped. She will never go to school again, never graduate from university, never become an outstanding inventor, a human rights activist, or a loving mother. Another story ended before it started. And there are already hundreds and thousands of such stories. Today, Russia is taking away childhood, health, and life from our children. It is not stopped by international legal norms or universally recognized norm of morality. Thousands of ordinary Ukrainians are dying instead of living and creating. Those who will be able to survive this war will for a long time confuse the sounds of dishes and fireworks with explosions, and the sound of a passenger plane with a bomber. One cannot get used to the death of young men, women, and even more so children. It is not normal when parents bury their own children who have never started to live. Our reality collapsed, and in its place arose the chaos of war and the ashes of thousands of destroyed destinies. Their memory should live in the hearts and mind of people. The guilty must be brought to justice. We want justice. And the humanitarian situation on Ukraine remains worst. The worst one remains in the localities along the front line and in those occupied by Russia. So I kindly thank Grzegorz Bierecki, the member of Polish delegation, who proposed this resolution, and thank my American colleagues who proposed good amendments. We support them and ask everybody support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We've had some very powerful speeches, and particularly the last one, so I'm grateful for that. We're now going to consider the amendments. Okay, there are 4 amendments. Just to remind you, the speeches for the amendments should be 1 in favor for 1 minute, and then if there is a person against, please also keep to 1 minute. So you've got the resolutions, the amendments. Let me just make sure we're talking from the same version. It's entitled AS22 SI5 Amend, okay? And in discussing the amendments, I'll call the proposer first and then call any opponent, okay? I will then ask the sponsor of the draft resolution, Mr. Bierecki, if he's not already spoken, for his opinion. Following that, I shall put the amendment to the vote. I shall ask speakers to observe a time limit of 1 minute. We are also required to vote on every paragraph to which there are no amendments. So, we'll now take paragraphs 1 to 6 together. Does anybody want a separate vote on these? Are you happy we take them all together? Nobody's against that, right? Those in favor of taking of paragraphs 1 to 6? Thank you. Any abstentions? No. Thank you. Right. Paragraphs 1 to 6 have been agreed. We now come on to amendment number 1. I call Mr. Smith from the United States.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This amendment recognizes the extreme vulnerability of the more than 8.4 million refugees who fled Ukraine since Russia's cruel and barbaric invasion on February 24th. Given Ukraine's exit restrictions on males aged between 18 and 60, UNHCR estimates that 90% are women and children. Most cross the Ukrainian border without resources or go to a place, making them extremely vulnerable to human trafficking. Even those with some funds quickly spend down to impoverishment. I've spoken to several NGOs, including International Justice Mission, the Knights of Columbus, all of whom have activities in these areas, and they say that the traffickers are trying to lure refugees with promises of accommodation, onward transportation, or employment. Traffickers are also using methods such as social media and online advertising to lure potential victims. Children are especially vulnerable. I hope this body will support this amendment.
Does anybody wish to speak against that amendment? could I ask Mr. Bieretsky what is his opinion of the amendment? Mr. Bieretsky?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank Mr. Smith for this amendment, which emphasizes the important factor of this human dimension, the supplementary item on which I proposed. So I will vote in favor of this amendment. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you for that. We'll now proceed to vote. Will all those in favor of the amendment 1 please raise their voting cards? Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Right, amendment number 1 is adopted. I now call on Sheila Jackson-Lee from the United States to propose amendment number 2.
Thank the gentleman for his thoughtful resolution. We have all seen the reports and footage of horrific scenes of carnage and destruction by Russian forces in Ukraine. Ukrainian and international authorities, as well as NGOs and individuals, are collecting evidence of war crimes and human rights violations. The first OSCE Moscow Mechanism expert fact-finding mission already in April found patterns of Russian violence that may amount to war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. Many of these crimes have been perpetrated on women. I'm outraged by the reports of women being held in basements and raped by Russian troops. And I'm also concerned about the vulnerability of Ukrainian women to human trafficking. There already are online sites dealing with porn and soliciting these women, victimizing these women and children. There is no doubt that these horrific and disgusting Russian acts have taken place and continue to take place, but they are also the creator of the pathway for women to be violated and trafficked along with children. We must recognize them for what they are. I ask my colleagues to support the amendment, my amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 2? If not, I'll put amendment, Mr. Bieretsky first. What's your opinion of the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this amendment, and especially the wording of this amendment, which, in my opinion, catch in a diplomatic language the cry of the millions of Ukrainians. Thank you very much for this amendment, Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Right, okay, we're now going to vote. All those in favor of Amendment 2, please raise their voting cards. Amendment 2. Thank you. Anybody against? Are there any abstentions? In which case, amendment number 2 is adopted. We now move on to no, first of all, I'm going to take paragraphs 7 and 8 together. Does anybody want a separate vote on those? No, okay. So those in favor of paragraphs 7 and 8, please show. Right, thank you. Any abstentions? Okay, those paragraphs 7 and 8 have been agreed. We're now coming to Amendment 3, and I call Mr. Smith from the United States to propose Amendment number 3.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, I want to thank our distinguished colleague from Poland for an excellent resolution. Of the 8.4 million refugees, 5.5 of those refugees are in Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, or Moldova. Other EU countries have stepped up to the plate, but most of them are there. We need to do more, including to prevent Ukrainian refugees from falling prey to online offers of housing and employment, which may actually be coming from traffickers. We also need to pay more attention to unaccompanied minors to ensure that they do not go missing forever. The OSCE Handbook on National Referral Mechanisms highlights government policies and introduces many critical concepts that recognize the importance of age-appropriate and trauma-informed approaches to victim identification and assistance, as well as the key role that survivors play in informing policy and program. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Does anybody wish to speak against Amendment 3? Right. Mr. Bieretsky, would you like to comment?
Mr. Chair, it's my distinct pleasure to support this third amendment. So as the ODIHR institution, the OEC institution, ODIHR is located in Warsaw. We are very much involved in the operations of this agency. So, and fully support the importance of this, to underline the importance of this institution in this supplementary item. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Betsky. I now want to put amendment number 3 to the vote. Those in favor of amendment number 3, please show with your voting cards. Amendment number 3, those in favor? Right, thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Right, amendment number 3 is adopted. We'll now take, a minute. Sorry. We'll now come on to amendment 4. Sheila Jackson-Lee to propose amendment 4, please.
Thank you very much. To the gentleman who is the proponent of the resolution, let me again thank Poland for, among other countries, but for the numbers of people, 2 million refugees from Ukraine. That's why it's so important that we acknowledge the atrocities of being committed in Ukraine, that the people who are committing them are brought to justice. In order for justice to be served and the individuals responsible held in account, as much evidence as possible must be collected and in a way that it can be used in legal proceedings. And once collected, it must be offered in a way that ensures that there is accountability and that they are not corrupted in terms of what is brought forward. The OSCE has a role to play in this. It should use all of its relevant structures and mechanisms to collect information. This includes the use of the Moscow mechanism, which has already been invoked for this purpose 2 times, as well as its institutions such as ODIHR and any field presence it may be able to establish in Ukraine. The truth must be told and accountability is imperative. I ask colleagues to support this amendment.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against Amendment 4? Right. Mr. Biretsky, your opinion of the amendment, please.
I fully support the amendment.
Thank you very much. We'll now put Amendment 4 to the vote. Will all those in favor of Amendment 4 please raise their voting cards? All right. Anybody against? No. Any abstentions? Right. Amendment number 4 is adopted. We now need to take paragraphs 9 to 12 together. Everybody happy about taking them as in one vote? Okay. Those in favor of paragraphs 9 to 12, please show. Thank you. Any abstentions? Right. Paragraph 9 to 12 have been adopted. Now, we now vote overall on the draft resolution. A formal vote on that as amended. Will all those in favor of adopting the draft resolution as amended please raise their voting cards? Right. This sums up the whole debate. Okay, thank you. Anybody against, please show. Any abstentions? Right, that I think is unanimous. Okay, so the draft resolution as amended is adopted. Now, we're ahead of time. I think we've done our business. Can I thank you all very much indeed for your very positive approach, for keeping to time limits, and for the high quality of the speeches which we've heard. Thank you very much indeed. We'll continue consideration of the last supplementary item assigned to our committee at our next meeting, which is 11:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you very much indeed. Have a good evening.